gentlemen, welcome to the Asher Marketing Podcast. Tonight's guest is Joe Wolfcale. Joe, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Anthony. Great to see you.
Well, good to see you too. It's been a while, and thanks for joining us tonight. You and I were just talking as we were reacquainting ourselves with each other. You had a bunch of travel planned in 2020. How'd that work out?
Well, we pretty much got one out of our 6 trips in for the year, so it didn't work out very well, Anthony, at all. I mean, we were hoping to get around North America, and it just didn't work out well.
Yeah, so hopefully you'll have a chance to revisit some of those. What was the 1 or 2 destinations that you're most looking forward to that maybe you have to put off now into the future? Anything you can speak of?
Yeah, I mean, for sure, we were very excited about going to Alaska.
Okay.
So, and I've visited 48 out of the 50 states, and Alaska and Hawaii are the 2 I haven't visited.
Oh, really?
So we were really excited just to see the beauty of Alaska. So really bummed out about that.
Well, hopefully sometime soon you can get there and get to Hawaii too. So check all the boxes.
We got to check them off.
Well, that's pretty impressive that you've done 48. You're about 40 ahead of me, I think. So good work.
Well, my background helped me get to a lot of those states.
Sure. Well, that's a great little segue into the first question we talk about on this podcast. Joe, as you know, this is called the Asher Marketing Podcast, but it's really just about different professionals and their career path and their organizations and the projects that they're working on. And you've got a number of different interesting stories to tell. Where I'd like to start is to hear a little bit about your career path, because you just founded a company, and we're going to get into that in a little bit, but you've got sort of this twisting, turning path that led you into the radiology world. So let's start at whatever you consider the beginning to be. How did you get started on a career path, and what has that looked like over the years?
Yeah, so I remember vividly, I was a junior in college down at Indiana University, and one of my professors said in the business school, said, you know, if you want to really get somewhere in life, you need to take your goals and write them on paper.
Okay.
And by writing those goals on paper, you're going to be able to forge your path, because you're going to be able to watch and monitor. And you wrote those down, so you have to meet those goals, right? You have to try to achieve those. So one of the goals I wrote down was, I want to be very diversified in what I do in my career. Yeah. So I started out in the heavy-duty manufacturing business. Okay. Years ago now. All right. Unfortunately. Years ago.
Well, and what did you study in school?
So I went to the Kelley School of Business, and I studied marketing. Okay. So I was a marketing major. Yep. And in my career path, I will admit, Anthony, I've not been in a marketing position in the 30 years of my career thus far. Not in a true, I mean, every day I'm marketing. But.
Sure. Yeah. So what was that first job, and where did you land, and what kind of work were you doing?
Yeah, I was here at a local company called Poly High Solider. Okay. Mm-hmm. And I had never heard of the company. And when I was fortunate, when I came out of school, the job market was booming. And so I had 6 offers to choose from. And Poly High offered a really cool opportunity to be what they call a marketing trainee. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm a marketing major, a marketing trainee. Yeah. And so I jumped into that job, and very quickly, I actually had a very unique stroke of luck hit me very quickly in that job. About 6 months into that job, one of the business units they had, it was called Quicksilver, and it was a liner for a dump truck. Okay. And so I had heard through the business happenings at Poly High that they were going to drop that business line. Hey, it's just not making it. We're not getting to where we want to go. So I went to the general manager of Poly High Solider, the organization, and said, hey, I'm a young guy. I know you're going to drop this, and it seems like there'd be no better training than to take a product that you want to divest in. You're not spending much money on me, so let me see what I can do with it. Oh, wow. And he looked at it and said, okay, yeah, we'll do that. And so within a couple years, we turned that product that was only generating a couple $100,000 in revenue to millions of dollars in revenue and profitable revenue. So it was really the start of my career, and that helped elevate my career path. So how long did it take you to turn that around, and what are some of the things you did that you think worked, even though it was kind of baptism by fire? Yeah, I mean, I had some really goofy things. I look back on it now, and they were really goofy things. But number one, it took me about 2 years to get it fully turned around. And
that's not bad, though.
It's not bad, yeah. And I created these success criteria. I call them success criteria, and we developed a distribution network. And so as part of that distribution network, I remember I had 7 different success criteria that you had to meet to become a distributor and to become a successful distributor. And keep in mind, I'm 24 years old, so I really didn't know anything then. I was just kind of making this up on the fly.
Sure.
But it worked. It worked. And so several distributors came on board, and they just grew very quickly. And then the second thing I did that I think really made a difference is as we grew, the organization allowed me to hire employees. And I was, I'd say, pretty careful with the employees that we hired. I wanted to bring an all-star cast on. And I think back at that time, I look back on those 5 or 6 years that we grew that business, and some of the most fond memories that I have, just great times, and the employees that I hired are still friends of mine today. They're just great people.
Oh, that's great. So you at a very early age got that experience of recruiting and retaining employees, which many people never get, and most of us until later in life. So that's great.
Right. It was exciting. It was fun.
So where do you go from there? You sort of have this great start to your career. You're running the show, and then what happens?
Yeah, I decided it's time to get a master's degree. So I did a weekend program at Michigan State University. So for about 20 months or so, about every other weekend, I'd go up to Michigan State and on Fridays and stay until Saturday nights. Okay. And go through an MBA program. And so I did that on the weekends while working at Poly High Solidar.
Wow.
And after about 10 years at Poly High Solidar, they kept giving me additional responsibilities, which was great. About 10 years into my career there, Poly High Solidar was sold to a company, and I thought it was probably the right time to go spread my wings. And plus, at that time, my wife and I really wanted to go and see maybe a different part of the world. Well, it ended up being a different part of Indiana, so we moved to Indianapolis, Zionsville specifically, and I moved into another heavy-duty manufacturing company running their sales and marketing teams.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So at this point, I'm trying to catch up here. You're starting a family. You're going to grad school. You're working a full-time job. How are you balancing all that at this point?
Well, my wife would tell you probably not very well. Yeah. So I did take my career very seriously. Yeah. So I would, if it required travel, I was the first to say, let me go and let me figure this out and let me work with the customer. And so I spent a lot of time developing my career and gone a lot and really, in a way, burning myself out on too much travel. So, but at the same time, my kids were pretty young then. Yeah. And so when they got old enough to the point where they're getting into athletics, I kind of sat there and said, I need to change things a little bit. So something you kind of have to experience firsthand before you can learn to make the change. So exactly.
So I'm jumping ahead a bit. So you're in Indianapolis, another manufacturing company. What do you do from there, and what's the next shift? Yeah,
so it's funny. So when my wife and I got married, we had guests at the wedding, and one of the guests at the wedding was a gentleman named Dr. Rausch. And he was a local physician here in Fort Wayne, Indiana, a radiologist. And I remember I was on the baseball fields with my son practicing baseball, and my cell phone rang, and I didn't recognize the number, but I answered it, and it was Dr. Rausch. And through all the pleasantries, he came back and said, hey, we're really interested in bringing on a CEO for Fort Wayne Radiology here in Fort Wayne, Indiana. Would you have any interest in that position? And after I got done laughing and said, Dr. Rausch, come on, let's get real here. I'm a manufacturing guy. I don't know a thing about healthcare. I'm going to do you a favor right now and tell you no thank you. And Dr. Rausch wouldn't take no for an answer. So he ended up calling me back a couple weeks later and said, hey, out of respect for me, would you please come up here and we can have breakfast and we can at least talk about the opportunity? Well, Anthony, what am I going to tell him? No, I mean,
sure.
So I had to come up here and talk to him. And so he presented the opportunity to me at Bob Evans. In fact, I remember we sat down, and again, after we get through the pleasantries, he looks at me and he says, Joe, I got to tell you, if I were you, I would never take this job.
Not much of a sales pitch.
Not much of a sales pitch. But I think, he's a really, really smart guy. And I think he was throwing down a challenge to me to say, you want a challenge, you better take this job. And so
what do you think, no disrespect, but what do you think they saw in you? Because at this point, you're a pretty young guy. You don't have any background in healthcare or, for that matter, radiology. What do you think they saw in you that made them say, let's give Joe a shot at this?
Yeah, I think, again, being lucky in my career. Mm-hmm. So he had kept track of my career and saw that in the various positions that I've had, I grew very quickly to middle or upper level management positions. So by the time I was 30 years old, I was in upper level management positions. So when he saw that and said, hey, we've got a group of radiologists here, and at the time they had 16 radiologists, and they knew they were going to grow rapidly. They were associated with Parkview Health, and Parkview Health at that time was in the mode of how we're going to grow. And so they said, we needed a leader to come in here that can manage that growth and take us to the next level. So I think just through that, he thought, let's at least just give Joe a shot, and he's seems to be a pretty decent guy, and seems to have a decent head on his shoulder. So it was just a flyer, I think, in his part to reach out to me. Just dumb luck again, where the worlds came together.
Yeah, and you ended up being there how long?
10 years.
Yeah, 10 years. So, and that's where you and I first met. And, I'll say this, and obviously I only share what you're comfortable sharing, but having worked in healthcare, I don't have nearly the healthcare background that you do, but having worked with physicians, they can be a tough group to work with. So how did you manage that as sort of a young CEO coming into a world you're unfamiliar with, and all of a sudden you have 16 bosses, all of whom are wearing white coats? How did that go?
And that's a great point. I remember my first day there, I woke up and I started talking to myself thinking, what are you thinking? Like, you were in manufacturing, you were good at it, you had a lot of contacts, and you completely shift gears. And in my mind, I'm going, well, remember, Joe, and as a junior in college, you wrote down you want to be diversified in your industry. So this is another industry.
Be careful what you wish for.
Be careful what you wish for. So I went for it. So I was really nervous. And I had dealt with physicians when I was sick. Like, I never dealt with physicians in the business world, so I really didn't know what to expect. So when I jumped into the first day, I remember I showed up. We had a 7:30 meeting, and in that meeting there were a couple doctors and an administrator from Parkview, and I feel like 80% of that meeting were all acronyms, and I had no idea what they were talking about. And I'm just writing down the acronyms, and I had to have written down 30 to 40 acronyms.
Wow.
And so after the meeting, I sat down with Dr. Rausch and said, what do all these mean? So I was really intimidated. It was really tough. But I will say the radiologists, they opened their world to me. They opened their hearts to me. And within a couple of months, we meshed very, very well. And it was almost magical. Like, that first 6 to 7 years at Fort Wayne Radiology, it was an incredible experience. And what I loved about it is radiologists are incredible people. So they have to deal with understanding the whole world of medicine, right? Because they're looking at every part of the body. Whether it's a bone or an organ or whatever they're dealing with, they have to know. So they're very, very smart people. So what was incredible about it is the knowledge I gained learning from them. So it was really, really awesome. It was a great experience. Yeah.
So you're there for 10 years. You're running the show again. You have some ability to think big. Talk about what comes next after that, and why that change occurs and where you go from there.
Yeah, so I made the move. So Parkview Health had been recruiting me for a couple of years, not heavily, just hey, Joe, we'd love to have you on board, and so in working with Mike Packnett and Rick Henby at Parkview, we sat down and just went through some things, and it became very interesting to me. It became exciting to get associated with one of the top employers in the city of Fort Wayne and the whole Northeast Indiana. So it was really intriguing to me, and I thought, wow, I feel like at Fort Wayne Radiology, I mastered my craft there. I was understood the business very well. I was making the right moves, and I felt like I did what I sought out to do there, which was to enhance the shareholder value for the physician group, and I felt like I was there. So I needed that next challenge. So Parkview offered that next challenge, and it was really, again, nerve-wracking because I'm moving from private practice healthcare to public healthcare in a very large organization with 13,000 people. And am I going to be just one of the numbers there, or will I be able to fit into the executive leadership role that I was going to be, put into? And so it was really just the challenge to say, let's do this. Let's see if we can make this happen.
Sure. So then fast forward to last year.
Right.
You make another change, and let's talk about that. So if I remember the story from a few minutes ago, you're going to take a year off, you're going to travel, you're going to have a nice leisurely 2020, and then the world changes and you decide to do something completely different. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, the whole goal, I'd worked nearly 30 years in the corporate world, and I was getting burnt. I was like, this is just a lot of, I need a little bit of a break. So,
and how old are your kids at this point? How are your kids now?
So my kids now are 23, soon to be 20 in a week, and 13.
Okay, so you're growing them up, and you're kind of watching the world fly by.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so I thought, let's take a year off. Let's have the sabbatical year. Let's travel. Let's have some fun, and we'll figure it out on the other end.
Yep.
Well, it didn't work out that way. Obviously. So I figured out pretty quickly, without the travel and what we were going to do, I was going to be pretty bored. So I had to figure out something to do, and I'd always had this dream. Always had a dream to start my own business. Again, if I go back to my junior year in college, I had a goal on there: start your own business.
Okay.
And so I thought, it's time to do that.
Yeah.
And so I reached out to a friend of mine who we had a business idea 4 or 5 years ago, and I had done a little bit more development on it. Reached out to him and said, "Hey, what do you think if we take this from a hobby and make a business out of it?" And he thought, if you're not working, you have the ability to work full time, I think it's a great idea to let's give it a shot. It's a great idea to do this. So that's when the new business started.
All right. So let's switch gears a little bit, and I want to dive into this deep because this is really intriguing to me. Tell us what your business is, what you're planning to do, and what the inspiration for that was.
Yeah, so our business is called Xillum. So, and it's spelled Xillum, kind of a weird name.
All right. Does that have any origin, have any precedent, or where does it come from?
Well, the URL was available.
Yeah, the .com was available. All right, good start.
Available, so that was a good start.
Yeah.
But really, it's all about illumination. So ILLUM is for illumination. And as we paired things that might work for the internet, Xillum worked out great.
Okay.
And Xillum.com, where Xillum was born.
All right.
So the business itself is a healthcare data analytics business. So when I was at Fort Wayne Radiology for 10 years at Parkview Health, as I looked at the landscape of data analytics, there's a real problem in healthcare in general, in taking data, disparate data sources, combining those data sources, and finding insights within those data sources. So at Fort Wayne Radiology, we were able to do some of that work. And so we thought, why don't we take the learnings that we've had over the last 15 years and create a software package that allows us to pull data sources together and build this unified data set that can bring, hopefully, significant value to the user.
So a couple questions. Why does that challenge exist? In other words, why is healthcare at large not better at making sense of that data, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think a couple things. Number one, I think healthcare companies are so concerned with the clinical side of healthcare, which is exactly where they should be, right?
Priorities are in the right order.
How do we become excellent at developing clinical care for our patient? And you look at things that have happened over the past. Now we can look at COVID-19 recently to say, okay, how do we capture and manage COVID-19 to not create a huge panic within the community? So they're focused on the clinical side of data, right? But not focused on the business side of data, just because they're so focused on the clinical side of data. So as soon as you get focused in healthcare on the business side, something clinical pulls you right back into the clinical side of data. And so largely it's ignored. And so clearly, if you were to go into any private practice or public healthcare system, you would see a disconnect between the various data sources and the insights coming from that data source.
And is some of that because healthcare is generally fragmented? You go to see your primary care doc for a checkup. He might refer you to someone, but that person has one objective to solve a particular problem. Does that play into it at all? The fact that it can be a little fragmented and we have specialists for different things, but rarely do those entities have the opportunity to talk to each other?
That's a great example. That's a great example. And if you think about that from your own personal health record, that's why they've started to create these personal health records, which is now capturing that clinical data and allowing you, Anthony Giuliani, to go into, let's say, an Epic MyChart to look at your personal health record where you may have 8 different physicians within that health record. So they're capturing it on a clinical data side. maybe not necessarily capturing the insights on the business side.
Sure. So tell me a little bit then, and I want to hear a lot more about this, but tell me a little bit about who your customer is then. Who is it that you're seeking to serve, and what other problems are you trying to solve for them?
Yeah, so currently we are focused on private practice healthcare.
Yep.
So a couple reasons why, right? So private practice healthcare, big issue within there. A lot of private practices are pretty lean staffed, so they're not going to have a ton of staff members,
Yep.
right? So, and this takes a very unique skill set. So those staff members they have, most likely they don't have that skill set. So we think we can bring a tremendous amount of value to these private practice health clinics without a huge cost, right? So we can bring these insights to you. So the software we're developing to do that is translatable to each and every healthcare customer that we are targeting, right?
Sure.
Because you don't have to customize it per client, because healthcare data is healthcare data. It just happens to be you as a patient,
Yep.
me as a patient, your listener as a patient.
Yeah. So a couple questions there too. What's the ROI for someone who invests in the software? In other words, where are they seeing the payoff in terms of using your service, using your software, and what's like the timetable for them achieving that payoff?
Yeah, so we're new. We're a young company.
Yeah.
We incorporated in September of 2020.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
very new. So we're spinning up our first clients right now.
Yep.
And so this is what we think you're going to see a payback very quickly. So we think it's under 1 year where you're investing in the software, but you're getting a payback through. So I'll just give you an example. So take a radiology practice. So a radiology practice that's looking at 300,000 studies a year.
Yep.
So they're associated with a hospital, and so they're reading the CTs, the MRIs, the X-rays,
Yep.
mammograms. So they're looking at 300,000 studies a year. And then that radiology group, after they read that study and they dictate a final report, right? So you get a record now that shows your final report, but they want to get paid for that, right?
Yep.
So a copy of that goes to their billing company, and most radiology companies are outsourced billing.
Yep.
Well, outsourced billing companies, they won't readily admit this, but I did have one tell me recently, we're going to miss about 3 to 4% of your charges. So 3 to 4% of those studies that come through, we're going to miss. So take 300,000 studies, take 3% of that. Let's just call it 10,000 studies that you're missing. And depending on your average reimbursement, that's a significant amount. Now, we're not saying we're going to find all 10,000 of those.
Sure.
But I bet you we'll find 5,000 of those that will more than offset the cost of the software.
All right.
To do so. So that's just one simple example. And then there's productivity operational measures that we're pulling into the software that will bring additional value.
So you've got your potential customers. I'm not going to say who my primary care doc is. I love him to death. He's awesome, but they're using paper and pencils. They're they're jotting down notes. How do you make sense of? I'm assuming that's not typical, but you get a lot of different information in a lot of different forms. How are you making sense of that?
Yeah, that is not going to be a target customer for us, Anthony. we definitely need that physician to be electronic.
Sure.
So paper and pencil becomes really, really difficult, right? Because somebody has to transcribe that into an electronic format.
Sure.
So our target customer are those physician groups, and I'd say probably 98% of them are not paper and pencil. They're all electronic.
Well, that's probably good for all of us.
That's good for all of us.
So are you looking just at the local area? Are you looking broader than that in terms of geographic footprint? What's your plan in terms of near term and long term for that geographic area that you're looking to serve? Yeah,
so we have a very exciting business plan. So we've got a group of investors backing us right now, and we're going into our second round of investment here in the summer of 2021. Okay. And so our strategy is nationwide. And so our first handful of customers are nationwide today. So our first 2 clients that are going live with us in this month One is up in Michigan, and one is out in Colorado.
All right.
So, and we're picking what we call design partners because we want them to help us continue to tweak and build the software.
Yeah.
So we're picking very specific clients in terms of this is the makeup of this client, and we need to better understand how this client, because what they're doing is applicable to these clients over here, but we don't want to get all the same type of clients. We want different, unique clients for our first half dozen design partners to help build the software.
So still willing to learn, willing to adapt based on what you're finding out early on.
Exactly.
Yeah, well, that's great. So right now it's you've got some investors, there's a physician who's a partner in the business. Does that represent the entire organization? Do you have any other employees yet? And how are you getting the work done?
Yeah. So we are working with a firm to do a lot of our software engineering. And it was probably the right move for us. Actually, so Dr. Vias is one of our partners. And Dr. Vias is just an incredibly talented individual. So he built the software to begin with.
Okay.
So not only is he a full-time radiologist, he's also an incredible engineer, computer engineers.
Wow.
So he built the software to begin with. So we have taken his software and we're working with an outside firm to build that software to make it HIPAA compliant, to build the back-end systems to make sure it's secure. So right now, it's the three of us that are in the business with our engineering firm. But actually, we're going to be posting our first 3 positions here in the next month and a half or so.
Okay, and if you don't mind me asking, what are those positions? What are you looking to grow first in terms of an employee base?
Yeah, so we're going to bring on software engineers and data analysts.
Okay.
So those are going to be our first position. So we're looking for a senior software engineer, somebody that's going to be able to come in and really be a part of our initial leadership team.
Sure.
And then next up will be a data analyst that can start to take all the data that we're collecting in this and start to help us develop insights for that data. And then third will be another software engineer.
Okay.
And then hopefully by the end of this year, if all goes as well, and we build out about 8 to 10 clients, and then we'll bring on some sales resources at the end of this year and really put the pedal to the metal.
All right. So with a client base that's going to be all over the place, and with a work environment that in many cases has gone fully virtual, do you see those folks being housed here? Can they come from anywhere? What's your model as far as how you're going to bring all the talent at the organization together?
Yeah, so I feel like you've been in our meetings. We've been struggling with this question from day one.
Yeah.
And we've gone back and forth.
Sure.
And I think what we want to do for the first key hires is to bring them in-house and have an office here in Fort Wayne and really develop that talent so that we can sit together and develop the software together.
Yeah.
And eventually, I think, that we won't be inhibited by the 4 walls. We can go a little bit more virtual.
But you got to build a culture somewhere, and
we do.
As a former CEO, I know you appreciate that as well as anyone. That there is something to be said for those intangibles of people being able to at least work collaboratively one way or the other. So we call this the Asher Marketing Podcast, even though it's a little more broad than that. Right now, you're wearing not just many hats, but every hat. So how is the marketing and sales getting done? What do you see that looking like? What are some of the challenges? What are some of the things that you feel you're well equipped to do based on your background?
Probably not much. Probably not well equipped for much. But we're struggling through this. So the sales side is where I have a lot of experience.
Yeah.
And the advantage to our business today is I was in radiology for 10 years, and we're focused on radiology groups right now.
Yeah.
So I have a tremendous amount of contacts throughout the country.
Yeah.
So it makes that part a little bit easier.
Sure.
On the marketing side, that's a different story. So we're not real sure exactly where to turn in on that. So I'll give you an example. We know that we have to become active on the social media side.
Yep.
We don't know how.
Yeah.
So we're going to figure that out. And I know my background's a degree in marketing at IU. It doesn't matter. I haven't experienced any of that over my career.
Sure.
So we're going to need help doing things like that.
Yeah, well, and it's a very different audience you're trying to reach.
It is.
You're not trying to reach the general consumer on the street. It's a very, very finite audience of decision makers who are extremely busy and hard to reach at that point, I would assume.
Yeah, and so Anthony, one of the things I'm doing right now is LinkedIn.
Yep.
And we're doing more personal connections on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And again, one of my partners is a radiologist, so he has connections on the radiology side as well. And we're not so the one advantage we have today, which is going to become a disadvantage down the road, is we're looking to be very very thoughtful on who we're bringing on board as customers today.
Yeah.
But eventually we're going to want to put the pedal to the metal. Yeah. And that's where we're going to have the real challenge. How do you get to that physician that's sitting in the dark room reading films and get their attention to give yourself an opportunity?
Yeah, and really LinkedIn works better when you do have that relationship and you can just leverage it a little bit more through the virtual, where it has some challenges is where you're trying to connect with people who don't yet know you.
That's correct.
So so that's not a don't envy that problem, but it's solvable. It's just a huge challenge. So what else is on your mind as you look at the future of the business? What are some of the challenges you're grappling with? What are some of the things that are exciting to you? What do you see when you look at the future?
Yeah, I've had plenty of sleepless nights the last 8 months just thinking about the business. Some days I wake up and worry. I worry a lot and struggle with a little anxiety, saying, "Can you make this happen?"
Mm-hmm.
And my go-to is get outside, go for a 3, 4, 5 mile run.
Yep.
And by the time I get back, I'm ready to take on the world.
Yeah.
So I've realized that doing a lot of exercise has helped me mentally become sharper on how to manage this business. So
I totally agree with that. If I can't figure something out, I can figure out how to get one foot in front of the other. And maybe that's the only problem I solved that day, but it's still a problem solved. So,
exactly. So, I think we're really excited about the prospects. I think a lot about our investors.
Yeah.
And, I want to be the guy that they look at and say, I took a chance on that guy, and man, what a great chance that was, because we just nailed it.
Yeah.
And so I'm very concerned with how we develop a strategy that's going to be successful. So that's what I think about a lot, is how are we going to drive a strategy that ends up being successful? And so my everyday challenges are thinking about things like that.
Yeah. Is there anybody else that who's a competitor in this space? Is there anyone else doing this? And if so, how do you differentiate yourself from those other players?
Yeah, there are competitors within this field, and so we're bringing something a little bit different than the competitors. So we're trying to bring our own secret sauce in the software that we're building. Yep. So we're building these crazy, unique algorithms that are running some machine learning through AWS SageMaker, and so we're trying to differentiate ourselves that way. But and not that we don't think our customers do a good job on customer service, but one of our differentiating points, and Dr. Vias and Dr. Beyer and I are all on the same page here, is we want to hit a home run as when it comes to customer service. So we are very focused on how to build that internal culture that's a culture of service for our customers. Yeah. And so that goes back to another question you asked earlier: where are you going to have these people located? Yeah. And we think the additional employees have to be with us so that we can build that culture, because we want to be so focused on providing superior service.
Yeah. Well, and it's critical today, especially for an audience that is pretty demanding. I would imagine they're gonna expect world-class service. So if you're ahead of the curve on delivering it, that's definitely a feather in your cap for sure.
We hope it can be a differentiator, and we hope that will be, we think our software and the package and the knowledge that we're going to bring to the user is going to be excellent, but we hope the service then has them saying, it's excellent, and we're not going to let any other competors in the door.
Well, it comes down to trust. It's do they trust you with, to help them grow their business and to make sense of their data. That's an admirable thing to pursue. Well, Joe, I'm going to turn to what we call the speed round of the program, where I ask you a few questions that are like the stuff we've talked about, but a little bit different, just to kind of synthesize what we've discussed so far. The first one, and you've had a really fascinating career, has to do with career paths and success in a career. If you were talking to someone, maybe it's one of your kids, maybe it's someone just getting started in their career, maybe it's someone who's making a career change like the one you're making, maybe it's someone who has an interest in entrepreneurship. What's your one best piece of career advice?
So, and I have told my kids this. My son just started a job at Ernst & Young up in Chicago, here in Fort Wayne actually, but he'll soon be up in Chicago.
Sure.
And it is about that one simple word: diversification. Mm-hmm. So, whether that's being diversified in your skill set, don't become a one-trick pony.
Yep.
If you're in marketing, if you're in finance, whatever it may be, go out there and explore the different areas within that. Yeah. But don't just simply diversify your skill set. Diversify your industrial background. So don't get pegged into one industry. Yeah. Become diverse in your industries, and it just opens the door. I know as an employer and as somebody that has hired a lot of people, my goal is to find those people that have those real world experiences that are not that one-trick pony and can bring a tremendous amount of value to my organization. So diversification.
Yeah, that's great advice. So as far as, the next question about your organization, I'm sure you're having the opportunity to practice this quite a bit, but if somebody stopped you on the street and said, you got 2 minutes, you got a minute, tell me everything that I need to know about your organization and why I should take more interest in it, what would you say?
Yeah, I have thought.
Very easy question to ask, not an easy question to answer. That's why I'm on this side of the table.
Way to put me on the spot.
Yeah.
So that's our little elevator speech.
Yeah.
So really, our goal is to bring compelling data closer to the user.
Okay.
So if you think about from a physician's perspective, a physician is so focused on the clinical operations side, and physicians, unfortunately, they're not trained much on the business side. Mm-hmm. So they tend to ignore that side of the practice.
Yeah.
And so if we can bring that data to them in an easy to use, understandable format, it brings a tremendous amount of value to their business, because most physician practices are owned by the physicians.
Yep.
And you should know about the value of your practice based on the business you own.
Yeah.
So that'd be the simplest way I can do it, is taking those insights and bringing them closer to the user.
All right. So present it not as another draw on their time, but actually a time-saving mechanism in the long run that's easy to use.
And very convenient for them on their smartphone, and they can look at it at 10 o'clock at night or 10 o'clock in the morning. It's always going to be available for them.
All right. That's great. Well, in the last question, I very much admire the fact that you've taken a risk at a time when people are very risk averse. There's a lot of people who are sort of pulling the reins in more tightly in 2020 and 2021 because of all the changes in the economy and all the pessimism that's out there. But you've made what is ultimately an optimistic move, saying this dream I've always had, this thing I've always wanted to do, I'm finally going to do it and take the opportunity to do it. So, for the folks who might be struggling with, making similar types of decisions or just, challenged in general with today's environment, how can you what can you share in terms of optimism, in terms of perspective on why people maybe should have a better look at the months to come and the years to come?
Yeah, I had a friend of mine many years ago. We were having coffee, and she looked at me and just gave me this quote and I've looked it up, and it's an unknown author, so I'm not sure who said the quote, but is, I would rather live a life of failure than a life of regret. And so that kind of stuck with me. And as I looked at what was happening last year and kind of my life goals and where I wanted to go, I sat there and said, okay, pandemic's not going to last forever. Right? Life's going to move on. And that quote just kept hitting me. I'd rather live a life of failure than a life of regret. And as I said earlier, a dream of mine was to start my own business. So I decided to take that quote very seriously and say, you know what, let's give it a shot. And if I failed, I'll look back on this and say, man, gosh, there were a ton of learnings from that. And I'll be a better person. I'll be a better leader. I'll be a better business person for going through that experience. But if I'm successful, then that just means the world to me. So I just looked at it and said, let's just give it a chance. What do you have to lose? Because I don't want to sit back, 30 years from now and say, what if I should have, what if, and I would have those regrets.
Yeah, that's great advice. Maybe it's the best time ever to take some chances. So.
I think so. I think so.
Well, Joe, as always, it's a pleasure talking with you. Thanks for sharing your story with us, and thanks for letting us know a little bit about your new endeavor, and good luck as you move forward.
Thank you, Anthony. It's been my pleasure. I've enjoyed it very much, and we'll keep you posted.
All right, sounds good. And thanks, everyone, for listening. We'll be back next week with another great guest, and we hope to have you on board then. Thank you.